Senator Camila Hayes, a prominent and highly respected state legislator, had just finished her customary Sunday visit to her mother's house. It was a cherished ritual, a brief escape from the pressures of public office. Now, she found herself at the local mall, ticking off her list of errands before the start of another busy week. As the evening sun cast long shadows across the mostly deserted parking lot, Camila casually strolled toward her car, her thoughts lost in the simple satisfaction of a productive day. Unbeknownst to her, a police cruiser had quietly pulled into the lot just behind her. Officer Janice Salazar, a seasoned cop with a reputation for her unyielding demeanor, was on her routine patrol. From her vantage point, something about the scene caught her attention. A lone black woman, well-dressed yet seemingly preoccupied, was walking through an isolated area, glancing briefly at her car's windows. Janice's years of experience had trained her to notice the smallest details that often signaled trouble. "What's she up to?" Janice murmured, narrowing her eyes. Her instincts whispered suspicion, and her hand instinctively rested on her duty belt as she parked. Stepping out with purposeful strides, she moved toward Camila, her fingers hovering near her holstered weapon. The thought of who this woman might be didn't cross her mind. To Janice, Camila was just another civilian, a possible anomaly in an otherwise ordinary evening. "Excuse me, ma'am," Janice called out, her voice unyielding. Startled, Camila turned to see the officer approaching. Her eyebrows furrowed in surprise, but her tone remained calm and composed. "Yes, officer? Is there a problem? What are you doing here?" Janice demanded, her tone sharp, almost accusatory. Camila blinked, caught off guard by the hostility in the question. "I'm just loading my groceries into my car," she replied, gesturing to the bags in her hand. "ID, please," Janice ordered, her voice clipped, her fingers now tapping impatiently against her belt. Camila hesitated, her heartbeat quickening, though she kept her expression neutral. "Is there a reason, officer? I haven't done anything wrong." Janice's jaw tightened, her patience wearing thin. "Just show me your ID, ma'am, and I'll decide that," she snapped. Suppressing a sigh, Camila reached into her purse and retrieved her wallet. She then handed over her driver's license, her movements deliberate and her demeanor controlled. Janice snatched it from her hand and glared at it with a practiced, skeptical eye. Her gaze paused as she read the name aloud. "Senator Camila Hayes?" Janice's eyebrows arched briefly, but her tone remained indifferent. "Never heard of you." Camila drew a steadying breath. Her voice was patient yet firm. "I'm a state senator. I represent District 12. Janice gave a dismissive glance at the ID before slipping it into her pocket, as if it were incriminating evidence. "I don't care who you are, Senator. Something about you being here just doesn't sit right with me." Camila stared at the officer, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "This is a public mall, officer. I have every right to be here, just like anyone else." Janice folded her arms, planting herself squarely in Camila's path. "You can explain that at the station. I'm taking you in." "Excuse me?" Camila's voice sharpened, her composure wavering for the first time. "This is absurd. I haven't done anything wrong." Her protests, however, were met with cold indifference. Janice's grip was firm as she led the senator to the back of her cruiser. Camila climbed in, her breathing steady, but her mind racing. Through the tinted windows, passers-by stared in confusion, their curiosity piqued by the sight of a well-dressed woman in handcuffs. Janice drove in silence, her eyes fixed on the road, her grip tight on the steering wheel. Determination etched into her expression. She was convinced she was doing her duty. Meanwhile, Camila sat in the back seat, her hands clasped in her lap, her thoughts a mixture of frustration and resolve. She reminded herself to stay calm. There was nothing to hold her on, no crime committed, but the sting of injustice gnawed at her. At the station, Janice marched Camila through the bustling precinct, past rows of desks where officers and detectives paused to take in the unusual sight. Whispers rippled through the room, some officers exchanging puzzled glances. "Why's she here?" one detective murmured to another. "No idea. That's Senator Hayes, isn't it?" Janice ignored the murmurs, leading Camila into a stark interrogation room. The air was cold, the walls bare save for a clock that seemed to tick louder than necessary. A metal table and 2 chairs stood in the center, an almost caricature-like setting for such an unwarranted arrest. "Wait here," Janice barked, shutting the door behind her with a sharp clang. Camila sat silently, the minutes stretching into what felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened and Lieutenant Jordan Pierce entered. His tall frame and calm demeanor immediately shifted the room's energy. "Senator Hayes, I'm Lieutenant Pierce," he began, extending a hand. His voice carried a tone of respect and apology. "I understand there's been some kind of mix-up. I'd like to get to the bottom of this." Camila accepted the handshake, her gratitude evident in her steady gaze. "Lieutenant, thank you for stepping in. But I would greatly appreciate an explanation for why I'm here." Pierce frowned, flipping through the hastily written report Janice had submitted. His eyes widened as he read, and a crease formed on his brow. "Suspicious?" Camila's eyebrows arched, her calm facade cracking slightly. "I was shopping. Is that a crime now?" Lieutenant Pierce let out a small sigh, an uncomfortable expression crossing his face. "No, ma'am, it's not. None of this makes sense." Before he could say more, the door swung open. Officer Janice Salazar strode in, completely unaware of the conversation taking place. She held Camila's ID in her hand, her confidence still intact. "Lieutenant, I've got her ID right here," she announced. Caught her wandering around like she owns the place. Pierce turned to Janice, his eyes narrowing. His voice was clipped, his displeasure unmistakable. "Officer Salazar, I hope you understand who you've arrested." Janice froze, her smirk faltering. "Who?" she asked hesitantly. Pierce set his jaw, his tone sharp. "This is Senator Camila Hayes, one of the most respected leaders in our state." The blood drained from Janice's face. Her posture stiffened as her grip on the ID faltered. I didn't know," she stammered, her confidence unraveling in real time. "You didn't know?" Pierce's voice grew colder, his displeasure palpable. "You had her ID in your hands. You should have taken it seriously. Instead, you overstepped your authority on dangerously shaky grounds." Pierce's words hung heavy, cutting through the small room like a blade. Janice's mind raced, but the weight of her mistake pressed down on her, leaving her speechless. "Lieutenant, she began, but Pierce cut her off, his voice commanding and unyielding. "You've crossed the line, Officer Salazar. This isn't just poor judgment, it's harassment. Plain and simple. And now, you'll face the consequences. Camila rose to her feet, her voice calm yet resolute. Lieutenant, I'm willing to let this go, but I deserve an explanation from Officer Salazar. At the very least, Janice shifted uncomfortably, her confidence thoroughly dismantled. She couldn't meet Camila's gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought you were someone else, she muttered, the admission laced with shame. Pierce shook his head, his disappointment etched into every word. You made an arrest based on assumptions. In this department, we don't act on assumptions, officer. You've violated the trust placed in you and tarnished the badge you wear. Outside the room, a small crowd of officers had begun to gather near the door, drawn by the tension spilling into the hallway. Whispers rippled through the station, the story spreading like wildfire. Salazar's in trouble, one officer murmured. Big trouble, another replied. Janice could feel the weight of their stares, the whispers like daggers in her back. Her once unshakable reputation as a strict but reliable officer was crumbling before her eyes. Pierce delivered the final blow, his tone decisive. Officer Salazar, I'm suspending you, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Janice's face flushed bright red, humiliation overtaking her. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but quickly closed it, realizing there was no defense to be made. Arguing would only make things worse. She nodded, her silence a reluctant acknowledgement of her failure. Camila gathered her belongings and walked out of the station, her steps measured and her head held high. Outside, the crisp evening air greeted her like a balm, a stark contrast to the tension she had endured. Janice, however, remained behind in the now empty room. Her badge had been confiscated, her pride left in tatters. For the first time, she was forced to confront the consequences of her actions. She had built a career on strictness, on being unwavering in her authority, but tonight, her prejudice had blinded her to justice. She buried her face in her hands, a single thought echoing through her mind. This is justice, the very kind I've denied to others. As Camila disappeared into the night, Janice sat alone, the weight of her actions heavy on her shoulders. The officers outside whispered among themselves, but Janice barely noticed. She wasn't just the strict cop anymore. She was the officer who had lost everything over an unjust arrest. And that, dear viewers, brings us to the end of this story. A powerful reminder of the cost of prejudice and the importance of accountability. Thank you for watching, and if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking stories. Until next time, take care and stay mindful of the power we hold in our actions.